When I was 13 years old, I lived on a park bench next to a public park. For food, I would hang out at a local 7-Eleven convenience store. I would sit there all day long, cross-legged with my back against the glass, far enough away from the doorway not to be an obstruction, but close enough to be seen. I would sit there silently hoping that somebody would feed me. On what I call the bad days, nobody would feed me. Nobody would even glance in my direction. So on those days, I would go back to my park bench, and the only thing that I would have would be a drink of water from the sink in the public restroom, and the knowledge that I wasn't even worth a moment of eye contact. On what I call the okay days, somebody would give me some milk, like a pint of milk or some juice. That would be about it. And then there were the good days, where I would be fed. Somebody would give me food, they'd give me something to drink, maybe even a little bit of extra change. My favorite days, though, were what I called the great days. On the great days, the manager of the 7-Eleven would invite me in. He would give me a job like sweeping the floor or stocking a shelf. He would give me some extra food, and the bonus would be that I would be able to use the private bathroom, which meant that I could disrobe and actually wash up really well. On one particular day, when the manager called me in, he didn't give me a job. He told me that his boss, the owner of the 7-Eleven, had seen me, and that I was a nuisance, I was an eyesore, and that I just couldn't hang out there anymore. He sent me with some extra food, and I went back to my park bench. After a couple of days, the food was gone and hunger was beginning to set in. I had no plan in mind. As I laid there, a woman happened by. She looked down at me and she said, "Child, are you hungry?" And I looked up and I nodded my head, yes. She said, "Well, come on then, let's get you something to eat." I followed her to her one-room bungalow, which had not much more than a small bed, a table with some old chairs, and a hot plate. When we got inside, she asked me if I wanted to take a shower. I immediately nodded my head yes. So I went into the shower, which was this tiny little stall. It had a bar of soap that was melting away and doubled as shampoo. When I got out of the shower, I dried myself off on a towel that was so transparent it looked like the bottom of a worn-out heel from a sock. As I exited the bathroom, the aroma in the air was Chef Boyardee ravioli. I remember it so well because it was my favorite after-school snack. So I sat down and I started to eat very quickly. I was starving. And the lady said to me, "Slow down, nobody's going to take your food. There's more where that came from." She continued to talk, and I can tell you, I don't remember anything that she said. All I remember was like the melody of her voice and how comforting it was. As I finished eating, she asked me if I wanted to spend the night. I quickly nodded my head yes. She said, "All I have is this small little bed. We'll have to cuddle up really close, but it'll be okay." I crawled into the bed, and she crawled in behind me. And when she did, she wrapped her arms around me. It was the first time that I had felt safe in a really long time. We fell asleep, and when I got up in the morning, she asked me if I wanted to come back. I nodded my head yes. She said, okay. She showed me a park bench that looked onto her porch. She said, "When you can come back, I'll turn the porch light off." I laid on the park bench and I was staring through the slats at the back, never taking my eyes off of her door, waiting for that light to go off. And as I watched, men went in and out of her flat all day long, until finally the light went off. I bounded back for that door and enjoyed another night of her warmth and generosity. in the morning when we woke up, she asked me if I knew what she did for a living. I shook my head no. She said, well, I'm a prostitute. I think she could tell by the look on my face that this really had no meaning for me. She said, I sell my body because I do drugs, or maybe I do drugs because I sell my body. It's been such a long time that I don't remember anymore. She then looked at me really seriously and said, I want you to promise me that you're going to go home. As I started to nod my head yes, in promise, she said, no, I want to hear you say the words. I spoke the words, I promise, and in my mind I thought, I can't go home. So what I did was I promised myself that I would not do drugs no matter what happened, and no matter how hungry I got, I would not sell my body. It was my way of honoring her. For the next year and a half, I continued to live on park benches, in abandoned buildings, and apartment complex saunas. At the age of 14 and a half, I fell into a job as a cocktail waitress and managed to rent my first apartment. Through all of that, I kept my promise to the woman that I call my guardian angel. I never sold my body, and I never did drugs. By now, you're probably wondering how it is I ended up on the streets. One of my earliest memories are from when I was 5 years old. My mother dropped me out of a 2-story window and broke both my arms. I can remember the sensation of the fall to this day. I can smell the rain in the air. It had been drizzling. It was that rain that softened the grass that broke my fall. Upon impact, I must have lost consciousness because when I woke up, my mother was wrapping me in my blankie and taking me to the hospital in a taxi. The next time when I woke up, I had 2 casts on my arms, holding them straight, leaving only my fingers free. It was around this time that I was sent to live with my grandparents. My grandmother was a functional alcoholic, and my grandfather was a child molester. My mother came and went with no particular schedule or rhythm for about 4 years at this point, until one day she came home and had a new daddy for me. We moved from Montreal to Miami with this new daddy, who, as it turned out, was a saving grace. He was a loving, wonderful man. So now my running had kind of abated a little, or at least if he was in town, I didn't run away. Only when he went on a business trip or he was gone for extended periods did I continue to run. He died 2 weeks after my 12th birthday. By the age of 11, I was labeled a habitual runaway. This is a term that is often used by law enforcement. And unfortunately, it serves to demonize the child, and it takes away that sense of urgency that we should have in looking for them. There's an attitude that the kid will just turn back up. It also takes away from the danger that the child is experiencing while they're on the streets alone. The term habitual runaway is also an abuser's best friend. My mother played up the fact that I was running away. She was the poor parent that had to deal with this out-of-control child. When I was 12 years old, I spent the night out all night for the first time. I ran away and I ended up at an arcade in a mall that had a merry-go-round and a bunch of rides in it. I felt comfortable there because there were a lot of families and a lot of kids. And as I sat there, as usual, I had no plan. I had no money and I had no change of clothing. Children that actually run away from home, we're not the ones who threaten that we're going to run away. We run away because there's been a traumatic event. It's our survival mechanism. As I sat there in the arcade, I was watching some kids on the merry-go-round, and evening was setting in. People were beginning to leave. A young man approached me. He looked to be probably in his early 20s. He was well-dressed, articulate. He started to talk to me. He offered to take me to get something to eat. We got in his car, and he told me that he needed to stop to pick something up. What he ended up doing was taking me to a wooded area that I followed him into willingly. He kept me out all night long. He raped me through that night. This is how I lost my virginity. It was a word that I didn't even know the meaning of yet. Children who run away from home are not troublemakers. We run from troubled homes. 80% of children who run away from home are experiencing either emotional, physical, and/or sexual abuse. 1 in 6 runaways will become victims of sex trafficking. Within the first 2 to 48 hours on the streets, a child will be approached by a predator or somebody who wants to exploit them. This man that kept me in the woods that night, I was lucky because he decided that when he was done with me, he would drop me off at my house. Had he decided to kill me, to keep me, or to sell me, I still would have just been known as another habitual runaway. Every year, between 1.2 and 2.8 children run away from home. That's in the United States alone. This is a very great statistic because children like me that run away are reported as missing. There are thousands of children that are in foster care that are never reported as missing. They simply just vanish. You may wonder, did anybody try to help me, or did I tell anybody what was going on in my house? And the answer is no. This was my normal. I didn't know that any other place didn't have abuse like I was experiencing. And I also believed that I deserved it. My mother solidified this feeling into place. When I was 9 years old, we lived in a condo where the lifeguard was molesting me. My mother found the gifts that he had given me to buy my silence hidden away in a drawer. As she began screaming at me, asking me what I did in return for these items, she also labeled me as damaged goods. I stood there with my eyes to the floor, filling up with tears that dared not fall in the face of her anger, shrugging my shoulders. The times that I ran away, when the police would ask me what was happening, I would just simply assume that same position. Children that run away from home run away from all different kinds of homes. They may, in fact, most of them come from middle to upper income families. And there's this thought that nothing bad happens behind pretty doors. Abuse doesn't know what kind of house you live in. It doesn't care about the cars that are in the driveway. It doesn't know if you're buying your groceries with cash or with food stamps. I was 12 and a half when I ended up going to boarding school in Connecticut. This was my first introduction to real normalcy. This was the first time I lived somewhere where every day when I came home, it was the same. Nobody was trying to hurt me. It was around this time that I started to kind of try to divulge a little information because I didn't want to end up going back home when the school year ended. So I would say my mother was mean. Literally, that was all I would say. I wouldn't elaborate. What I was met with were people looking at me like I was just a spoiled child, just an overindulged, spoiled child. And my mother was an incredible actress. She could play an Oscar award-winning performance of Mother of the Century at the drop of a dime. So for me as a child to combat this huge persona that everybody loved and tell about the abuse I was suffering when I knew I deserved it, it was just an impossible situation. My biggest hope right now is that every one of you is asking, well, what can I do to make a difference? How can I make an impact? For starters, you can share my message. We need to destigmatize runaways. We need to understand that children that run from home are running for survival. Ask yourself, what would make you prefer to live on a park bench rather than wake up in your own bed? If you know of a child that is running, if you know of a child that's at risk or you think is experiencing some sort of abuse in the home, befriend them, mentor them. Don't ask them questions because, like me, they're not going to have the answers. But if you give a child a soft place to fall, their stories will unfold. If I had had that kind of support, if I had had a soft place to fall, I would not have run away from home. I want to leave you with one final little thought. Every day when we get up in the morning, everywhere we go throughout our day, we are faced with the same two choices: to do something or to do nothing. How many of you have walked past a homeless person and averted your eyes? You wouldn't walk past me as I appear before you now, yet I am still that same person. Take a moment, give some change, give a smile, a moment of kindness, because a moment of kindness can save a life. My favorite saying, and it's so true, when you save one life, it is as if you saved the entire world. Thank you.